Welcome to the International Franchise Association's Women's Franchise Committee podcast, Her Success, the Stories of Female Franchise Leaders. I'm Amanda Dempsey. I'm a franchise attorney and a shareholder with the firm of Saxon and Stump. And today I'm talking with Lynette McKee from McKeeCo Services. Lynette has a really illustrative career in franchising. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of background to her. And I'm so thrilled to be talking with her. We had a prep call before this, and she has so much insight to share. So I'm so excited that you're with us today, Lynette. So a little bit about Lynette. She has over 30 years experience in franchising, and she's held executive positions with brands that we all know, including Dunkin, Burger King, Denny's, Checkers, and Metromedia Restaurant Group. And now she, in the past few years, she formed McKeeCo Services, and she provides franchise consulting. So she'll tell us a little bit about that later. And she was also the executive director of the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation. So she's definitely considered an industry expert in all franchise industries and is a guest speaker at many events. She's also very active with the IFA. She's a former Crystal Compass winner and Bonnie Levine Award winner, and she's a CFE. She's done tons of CFE instructing as well. So she has such a really vast background in franchising. I'm so excited to have her with us today. So welcome, Lynette. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been involved with the Women's Franchise Committee off and on for many years. So I know the committee does a lot of good work.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you as our guest today. Why don't we, before we kind of go into some of your background, just tell us a little bit about how you got into franchising. So, I'm sure that franchising was a lot different 30 years ago when you started out. And so, did you know that you wanted to get into franchising, or was it just kind of, I guess as luck would have it?
It was actually a fluke. My husband and I owned a commercial real estate company in Nashville, Tennessee, and we did some work for what was in Spartan Foods, which was Hardee's Food System over in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And we had a commercial property listed in Middle Tennessee, and the company approached us about the site, but it had to be rezoned. So we went through a whole rezoning process with Hardee's. And a few months later, they called and said, "We're moving Denny's from California to South Carolina. Would you be interested in a position?" And at that time, the real estate in Nashville was declining. And so it was sort of, well, let's see what happens. So I moved to California, to Irvine, and that was back when the UFOC, Uniform Franchise Offering Circular. And my first role was to move the franchise department of Denny's from California to Spartanburg with no people moving. So I had to move to California, learn everybody's job, 17 positions, moved back to Spartanburg. So I commuted back and forth for 6 months, learned all the roles, hired new people, and everybody in California was losing their job at the end of the tenure. So it was a sometimes I think if I had known what I was getting myself into, I might have thought a little harder about taking the position. I didn't know at the time, so kind of jumped in both feet first, and it worked out. And but that was my first intro into franchising. I didn't even know what a UFOC was, the old FTD.
Yeah,
so
no,
it was
that's
a
so
fast
great. And what a
curve.
crazy story. That's a lot of us, I also, when I was getting into franchising, I'm an attorney, but I didn't know anything. I didn't know franchise law was even its own specialty. So I think sometimes we find ourselves in those positions and it just happens to work out. But yeah, that was pretty much trial by fire for you. And I'm sure there was a lot of, good moments and bad in that first role.
Oh yeah, I could tell a whole lot of stories at another time.
Well, I think it's safe to say that you found a really good fit for yourself professionally,
Yeah.
because you stayed there, you stayed in the business for this many years. What is it about the industry that has continued to kind of draw you in or make you stay involved after all these years?
Well, the business itself, the business model is very interesting. And even though it changes a lot over the years, there's still some commonalities that stay no matter what. And a lot of people will say this, but it's true. The franchise industry is really a relationship business within peers. So people that I have known all during my tenure with franchising have stayed my friends no matter what company I've moved to. If I had a question, I could pick up the phone and call someone and say, "Have you ever faced this before?" So it's a very accommodating and very high relationship industry. And the new folks that are coming into the industry, I think they're beginning to learn that, but they really don't know it yet. But those of us that have been around a long time, it really is it's a relationship business.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about it as well. I've been doing this for about 11 years, and a large chunk of those early years were really spent kind of learning the business. So I wasn't really out and about as much as I've been in, maybe like the last kind of handful of years.
Yeah,
But it's definitely, I mean, you see people move around as as you have, and as you
yeah,
mentioned. And I think, it's that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, kind of that, like, have a great idea, pursue it, kind of take something from the ground up is like really cool.
mhm,
But I think you also do see how important relationships are when you're doing that, right? Like when
yeah,
you're moving from place to place, because you do still need your resources. So
yeah. I still stay in touch with some of the franchisees I've known for 30 years. And it's interesting, they really become extended family versus just being a franchisee of a system. And so it kind of grows your network all over the place.
yeah, and that's a great testament to the work that you did, like working internally. If the franchisees, have a good relationship with you and want to stay in touch with you
Yeah,
after all these years, I mean,
yeah,
that's really hard to achieve. And I know systems all over the place are looking for, basically that kind of relationship with their core franchisees. So,
yeah.
yeah, do you have any like tips about how to do that? I don't know if you want to share those, or whether that's like a
Um,
McKeeCo proprietary
no,
method.
I'm open to share anything. Um, in the beginning stages when I was in sales before I moved into more of a leadership role, it was very important to me to get to know everybody that was a potential franchisee. So it was not just about what their business plans were, but how that affected their family, who they were. And usually the first 2, 3 phone calls, we almost didn't speak much about the business at all. It was really about getting to know each other. So by the time they became a franchisee, it was like they knew me, they knew everything about me. And if there was any issue that was going kind of in a bad direction with the franchisees, the company would call me and say, "Can you please call, you know, Joe Smith, because we know that you have that relationship and you can kind of beat him over the head just a little bit in a very kind way because he trusts you." And so that's really, it's not rocket science. I just built those relationships in the very early stages. And then the other piece was, if I ever told them I was going to do something, I did it. So if I said, "I'm going to call you Tuesday at 3 o'clock," I called. If I couldn't for some reason, I dropped him a note to say, "I promised to call you Tuesday. This has come up. I want you to hear from me." So just little things like that made so much difference because they trusted me to kind of be their partner along the way. And I didn't try to do a sales job. It was, "I'm going to provide you with the information. I'm going to answer your questions. I'm going to be there with you until you make a decision. And if you decide not to do it, I'm still going to be your friend and stay in touch with you. And if you decide to move forward, I'm going to be there to help you." And that's really all it was.
Yeah, and wouldn't you say that really creates like that trust,
Yeah,
creates like a brand ambassador that then helps you sell more franchises, right? Because then they can
exactly.
be called on by the other people,
Yeah,
so that are interested, and say, they might have questions about you, and then they'll
yeah,
be candid with them about,
yeah,
basically how
exactly.
great you are.
Yeah. In fact, my husband still stays in touch with a bunch of them because he has a joke list, a distribution list.
Uh-huh.
So, so he has a lot of my former franchisees on his distribution list when he's sending jokes out.
Oh my gosh, I want to get on that list.
I can get you on the list.
Oh, thank you. I just feel like that would really like brighten my day. That's awesome.
And they're funny, they're all good jokes, but they're really funny. And I'll look at his distribution list sometimes, and I'll see people that either were people on my staff or people that were franchisees of mine. And I'm thinking, well, he stays in touch with them more than I do.
Yeah, that's great though. He's creating a touch point for you. That's awesome.
That's right.
You're gonna have to give him a raise, Lynette.
Yeah, no.
Oh gosh. All right. So I want to just talk a little bit about, being a woman in the business. I'm sure with like a 30-year career in franchising and counting, I'm sure you've seen things change significantly for women in the industry since you first started. Can you tell us like just a little bit about those changes? And they could be good or bad or, whatever you think, but I'd like to hear a little bit about it.
I'll tell you some funny ones. So
okay.
When I first started at Denny's, once we settled in Spartanburg, and it was maybe a little bit not quite as forward thinking, you might say, at that particular region of the country. And I found out that the women still had to empty their own trash cans. So when the staff came around to clean the offices, they only cleaned the offices of the male counterparts. And then one of the other is all women had to wear uniforms at that time. And the company thought it was a perk. And they had a spring and summer uniform and a fall and winter. But they were not great. I mean, they had a skirt and a pair of pants and a couple of blouses and a jacket and a sweater. And Monday through Thursday, you had to alternate those. And on Friday, you could wear your own clothes. So when I started with the company, I was going to be traveling. I needed to be wearing suits. I was in meetings with upper management, and they asked me if they gave me the option to wear a uniform. And I said, no, I'm not going to wear a uniform. And so I was the only female walking around the building for probably a year and a half or more that didn't have a uniform on. And so one day I got a phone call in my office, and it was, we didn't have caller ID on the phone, so I didn't know who it was. And it was a female voice. She said, "You don't wear a uniform, do you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I didn't think so." Click. So, little things like that. And then a couple of things when I traveled with trade shows, at one point I handled the Southeast. There was a gentleman who had the Northeast and the West. And we were standing in a booth, and a gentleman came up and he said, "I'd like to talk to someone about North Carolina." And I said, "Okay, sure, I can help you." He said, "No, I'll wait for the guy." And I said, "Okay." So I just stood around. So for 20 minutes or so, the guy stood, he waited. And I thought, you know what? Let him be. I'm not going to make a big to-do about it. So when he came over, Ted came over, and the gentleman said, "I'd like to talk to you about North Carolina." And Ted kind of looked at me and looked at the guy. And he said, "That's her territory. I don't know anything about North Carolina." And the guy just kind of went, "Okay."
And so did he talk to you or not?
He did. And then about 6 months later, I wound up getting a promotion. So the two guys that I was with actually then reported to me. They were great guys. They were older than me. They loved their wine. So one night after a trade show, I said, "I'll go in and open the booth the next day. You guys come in later," because it wasn't going to be busy. So the gentleman beside me in the other booth said, he says, "Wow, won't it be great when we get to the point to where we can sleep late and have our staff come in and open the booth?" And I just kind of looked at him and I said, "Oh, no, they report to me. I told them to sleep as long as they wanted to." The guy wouldn't even look at me the rest of the trade show, much less speak to me.
Oh my gosh.
Those are just things that, and I had to take it with a grain of salt. I laughed it off. There was, not a big deal, because eventually, as time progressed and years progressed, it was more commonplace to see women in leadership roles. But it was, it was a little challenging at first. So I just let it roll off my back.
Yeah, that's such a testament though to you, and just, that keep going attitude, just, not to let that bother you and to keep after it. I mean, I know that there's probably many women that would have been discouraged by that. So it's great that you consider those funny. I mean, I think they're funny too, but I mean, I'm sure that during the, when you were going through them, it felt a little bit tougher at the time, but it sounds like you just kind of brushed it off, and that's really a great, way to approach it, is like, next thing, right? One foot in front of the other.
Well, that's all you could do, because it wasn't my problem. It was other people's problem by having the attitude. So it really didn't faze me that much.
Right. That's awesome. So, other than like those stories, did you really face any like significant obstacles? Like, do you, to your knowledge, like, were there, instances of like, maybe not potentially getting a role that you wanted or anything like that, that you needed to overcome? Or did you find, generally that people in the industry were pretty like receptive to you kind of being, as you said, like meeting with executive teams and being in the boardroom?
Yeah. I really didn't. Maybe others have, but even in the initial role with Denny's, and I always consider myself to have a lot of common sense and being fairly intelligent. And so I could, anything that was tasked for me to do, I could sort of figure out how to make it happen. And so I developed a reputation in that regard. And so I'm pretty lucky. I never really faced that so much that somebody got a promotion over me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will tell you, even at Denny's, when my first role was in administration, to move the department, but they had interviewed about 30 men for the sales role for the Southeast. And my boss walked by one day and I just made a flippant comment. I said, I could do that job. So, because I had been in commercial sales, I had dealt with commercial real estate, much larger projects than anything that they were working on at Denny's. So he just kind of stopped and looked at me and he said, do you want the job? And I said, well, first I got to make sure, because I have a son at home and my husband's kind of Mr. Mom. So I got to make sure that's works out. Right. And once we got all that settled, I literally got the job. So, but it was just so great. I just very flippantly said, I could do that job.
That's great though, because that shows so much, like confidence in yourself. And even if it was just a side comment, right? Like, I'm sure that he picked up on that like, hey, listen, she threw her hat in the ring. Just maybe it was a little, side comment, but she wouldn't have said it if she didn't think she could do it. So,
and I don't think he'd ever considered me for the role until I said that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, literally they had interviewed 30 people, but they'd all been male for that position.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and there you were, girl. You're ready to get it. You're just waiting for someone to look to the left, right?
Yeah. Well, and then I was able to be promoted. So there were three of us, the two guys and me, and both of them were in their 50s at the time. So they actually promoted me to be over them as their supervisor. So at that point, there wasn't anything about not promoting females or anything like that. So it all worked out.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear it. And I think, I've talked to, quite a few women in franchising now. And I think that, even since I've been around, I think there's been more and more kind of women at the forefront, even since when I kind of first started doing this. But I get the sense that, and I think this kind of goes a little bit back to what we were saying before with like the entrepreneurial spirit, that like really the industry is willing to accept anybody that's going to get things done, because it's fast paced and it's everything is moving. It's kind of built on innovation and being at the forefront of that. Right. So I've gotten that sense from a lot of people, and I love to hear it, because I think that it's a little bit different than in other industries in that sense that, they're willing to kind of, as you said, maybe consider the candidate that nobody else is considering, as long as, they have demonstrated really like the ability to work hard and get things done.
Exactly.
Awesome. So, I want to talk a little bit about your journey and, who has been an influential part of that journey. So It can be colleagues that you worked with, maybe somebody kind of early on, as you mentioned, that kind of gave you a shot at a leadership role, family, really anyone that you think, and it could be more than one person, that's been a really big influence on your journey and has kind of helped you through the way.
Well, mine's a little bit different probably from what you would expect, but all of my family and even my husband's family have all been what we call self-employed business owners. So my grandparents, both sets of my grandparents, my parents worked in their businesses. They were small, but it was still a family-owned business. And so one of my grandfathers owned a grocery store in a community where we lived in Middle Tennessee. And from the time I was 8 years old, I worked in the grocery store all summer. Back then, when I was a child, you didn't have self-pumping gas stations. So whoever was working in the grocery store helped to pump the gas. I stocked shelves. I helped with the books. I did everything, during the summer and after school. And I think that really set me on a path just to be able, because you have to make decisions. You have to live with those decisions. You have to take the initiative. You have to overcome obstacles that people will put in front of you. I mean, we had the grocery store robbed 2 or 3 times at night, not when anybody's in there, but during the evening, and how we had to overcome that, and things that were stolen from the store, and just dealing with insurance and different things. So I think I just learned at a very, very early age to be able to just take the initiative. And so when my first job with Denny's was to move to California and move the department back. So the gentleman that I reported to, I said, do you want a weekly accounting? Do you need to know? He said, no, if I see you here, you're here. And and we'd have to have everything back by April 19th. And this was like the first week of December. And he said, you see all these people, their jobs are going, but they're not. So you got to learn all their jobs. And so, I just went back to the hotel room that night and sort of got my head together of what I needed to do, and figured out my timeline, and when I would be in California, and when I would be in Spartanburg, when I had to hire people, and when I had to learn everything. And but I think that stemmed from my early childhood of having those experiences, because it really, I never was afraid that I couldn't do it. Sometimes there were challenges because all the people that were supposed to be working in California some days didn't show up. So even though they were supposed to be paid if they showed up. So, those kind of things. But I think that was more of the influence for me. And then, as I progressed, there were a few people that provided me with promotions, but I know there wasn't anything given to me. I know that it was earned. And, and then I came in a few years ago and told my husband, I said, I'm going to quit my job. Well, he was retired playing golf. So the first thing he said is, can I still play golf? And I said, yes. He said, am I going to have to go back to work? And I said, no, I already have 2 contracts for business, so we're good. So I always had a plan B.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great story. Like, you kind of grew up in an entrepreneurial family. I mean, I think some people kind of discount the small business owners in their family, and they don't consider them entrepreneurs, but they are, even though their businesses might not be, they're not the Steve Jobs of the world, but they are running successful businesses, right? And they're teaching you by having you do it, and having you kind of overcome that stuff, and then you're gaining confidence, right, in doing so. So that's really great. I mean, I love those kind of work in the trenches stories. I mean, we all have them. I think my mom's a bookkeeper, so I was doing trial balances on 3rd grade break for her, kind of adding up receipts and stuff. And I think it instills a certain amount of business confidence, right? Because like, you've seen it before, and you're not like, your head's not really in the clouds with that stuff, right?
Yeah. And, I never was really worried about my next move, so to speak. I remember one time at Dunkin, it was very stressful, and The senior leadership team, we had our goals were very, very lofty at that point. And one of them made a comment to me of, "You don't seem so stressed out." And I think everybody was kind of afraid of losing their job, but honestly, my comment was, "Well, I had a job before I got this one. I'm sure I can find another one."
Yeah.
And so they just kind of looked at me, and I said, "Well, it's the truth." If they don't like what I'm doing, then they'll tell me to leave, and I'll go find something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a great perspective. And I think, people are really moving around a lot now. And I think people are starting to gain that perspective back. Like when I started doing this, the
Yeah,
job market was really tough. And I think some of the things that we kind of got conditioned to, deal with, and just like the fear a little bit of losing
yeah,
our jobs really, I think especially in my case, like suppressed a little bit of me feeling comfortable doing the job the way that I saw fit. And I think that's never a good thing, right? Like having that confidence to be like, this is what I'm doing and this is the way I think it should be done. If they don't like it, there's probably a better fit for me out there.
yeah,
I'm really pleased to see people kind of returning to that mentality a lot more in this
yeah.
market.
Yeah, it's tough to in certain respects, but I always had a safety net here at home that if there was anything that went awry, then we'd figure it out. But and some people don't have that. They feel like that they have to stay where they are. But you gotta look at quality of life too. Is
Yeah.
something sometimes you just have to make the decision to do something different.
Yeah, that's a great segue into your decision to kind of open your own shop and your own business. And you already teased that a little bit with potentially shocking your husband back to work. But I want
Yeah.
to talk just like a little bit about it. And after working in-house with over, 5 major brands in franchising, and then, as you said, a career even before that in commercial real estate. At one point you decided to create your own consulting company and, quote unquote, be your own boss. So tell us a little bit about, why you made that decision. And then, we can talk a little bit about how your role is both the same and somewhat different, and kind of, what's
Oh yeah.
what you're doing now.
Well, for many years, we had a son that was very good in sports. And so we lived where his sports were. And so that meant I had to commute. And even when I worked at Dunkin, we lived in Orlando because he had just started his college career at a university down here to play basketball. And my husband said, "No way, I'm moving to Boston." So they were kind enough to allow me to commute. But over the period of years, I mean, I was traveling 48 weeks a year. I was either
Yeah.
going to the office or out in the field. And it was finally just one day, got up and said, "I just don't want to live out of a suitcase anymore."
Mhm.
So fortunately, through the franchise industry, I had a lot of contacts. And so I started calling some CEOs that I knew. And I said, "I'm not looking for a job. I just want to know if you have a project that you don't want to hire anybody full time for. If you just need, I don't care if it's a week's worth of work or you need somebody for 6 months or whatever. I just I'm thinking about doing this on my own." And within a couple of weeks, I had 2 contracts signed with 2 companies. And I did the math, and it was, kind of a bridge for the first year to get past expenses. And then after that, I've been very lucky and I've stayed busy, but it was, you know, traveling nonstop. One company that I worked for, I was gone 20 weekends, including the week during the week because of events and things that they had. And I was just physically worn out.
Mhm.
And I said, I've got to do something. I don't mind traveling, but if I do a couple of short trips a month, it's different than getting every, Sunday night or Monday morning, getting up and getting on an airplane. And so that really was, a part of my motivation. And then, I wanted to get to a point too, to where I could sort of pick and choose the companies that I wanted to work for. And there have been some that I've said no to. And there have been some that after getting into a contract with them, I sort of figured out that they weren't the type of company I wanted to work for. So I very quietly and ethically gave them my 30-day notice and went on my way. I've only done that a couple of times, but at least when you have a company like this, you have the luxury of being able to do that.
Yeah,
and I didn't want to leave them in a lurch, but I also recognized that they were doing some things that I just didn't think were quite right, and I just didn't want to be associated with it. So I made the decision to, pack up my computer with them and take off. But, I've been really, really lucky. I've had some companies that I've had like 3 tenures with when they'd bring me on to help with a certain project. They bring somebody full time. That person doesn't last, so they bring me back to do a project.
Yeah.
That person doesn't last. So that's happened 3 times with one company where I get a call and they say, hey, we need you to fill in until we can find somebody. I've done some interim CDO, Chief Development Officer, and VP work when a company has lost someone and they want to take their time and hire the right fit. So I've stepped in for 3 to 6 months from companies just to help run the projects and the processes and the team and make sure everything stays status quo. I've worked on projects for a week and I've worked on projects for 3 years. So it just really depends on what they need. One of the things that I learned early on, a lot of times they'll call and say, well, our sales team is just, can you evaluate it? We don't feel like that they're performing the way they should. Well, when I get in and really pull the onion layers back, I find out that there's more about the company that's prohibiting the sales from working versus just the sales team not doing their job. So anybody I work with now, I go back to kind of what I would call the beginning and look at who they are, how they're performing, how they handle their franchisees, how the franchisees are performing, how they're training, all the different things, because all of that leads up to a good sales process. And if they don't have that in place, then a lot of times they're just not going to be successful, and they scratch their head because they think it's all about the sales team, but it's not. It's about, do you have a best-in-class operating company?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? That's the symptom of like a larger problem. And one of the things you've been able to learn over time is that, you can probably spot that pretty easily once you start to take a deep dive.
Yeah. I can spend a half a day with them and I can tell you, I can pretty much pinpoint where they've got issues they need. And there have been a couple of times I told them, don't even try to do franchise sales. Just wait, fix your issues. And one company was very diligent. They took 18 months and then they came back and said, okay, now we're ready. Can you just make sure we have our sales processes set up the way they should be?
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's such a good innate skill to be able to, say to first be able to see what those issues are, and then be able to convince the client that you've been, hired for a small project on, right? To hey, this is a larger problem than you thought, and this is why I think so. So, yeah, well, I mean, I'm so glad that you're able to do that, for yourself, right? To be able to, take a step back after I shouldn't even say back, approach things differently, because I don't think you're taking a step back, but to approach it differently, and be able to use all the skills that you've gained over, this really amazing career in the industry to kind of, pick and choose clients that, you'd like to work with, and then be able to, provide them with, as you said, kind of first-in-class services, and really get them up to par. So that's really great. I think that's a really great kind of exclamation point on an otherwise really successful career.
Well, thank you. It's a lot of fun and I still enjoy it. So as long as I'm motivated to get up every day, I'll keep doing it.
That's awesome. All right. So I have one more kind of general question.
Okay.
And I like to ask this one because, I think it usually highlights some of the best kind of experiences that people have had in franchising. So, and it can also be personal too. It can be, personal or professional, but the question is, what is one of your proudest moments?
Well, and I saw that when you sent me sort of my cheat sheet to look at, and I will tell you at Dunkin, we had a very large team, It was probably the second largest team in the company. We had 65. I had 19 paralegals on my team, process documents. And I'm going to guess 18 months or so, they did an evaluation, an internal team evaluation. And my team got the highest rankings of any team from their self-evaluation of, did they enjoy coming to work? Did they feel like they were supported? All the good kind of questions that make you want to be an employee somewhere. And we got the highest ranked department of any department at the company. So, to me, that's the proudest moment, because we wanted the staff to, when they get up every day, to feel excited about going to work, know they're supported, and hold them accountable. And they also told me that I was the most accountable holding leader that they had. They never had to tell me to put anybody on performance review, but we did it in a kind way. And we tried to avoid it because we would meet with everybody on a periodic basis, not just on a yearly review. And it wasn't like a weekly, like you have a staff meeting with your superior, but we asked questions like, what keeps you up at night? What's not working? Where do you need more support? Does your equipment work? What are problems with your travel? Is there anything that we can help you correct? If you could create the perfect job description, what would you change about what you're doing? What do you want to do in the future? One lady wanted to go into international, and she said, I was afraid to tell anybody because I was afraid you would terminate me here. And I said, no, I'm going to go to the international department, and I'm going to ask them if you can start attending some of their staff meetings to see if this is really what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And if you do, then over a period of a couple of years, or whenever they have an opening, then if you can be considered, that gives me time to put somebody else in your position. So to me, those were the things that made everything work, was how we treated the staff. They knew we had support. I would have other team members from other departments come in and close the door in my office, kind of venting because they were frustrated with, something that was going on. And anytime we had an opening, we had immediately had internal people wanting to come over and work for us. So to me, that was the proudest thing, because it meant that people were being treated right and that they felt appreciated, and they wanted to be, they wanted to be a part of a team that was, everybody felt good about.
Yeah, that's really great. And I feel like that, how many years ago was that, if you remember, approximately?
Almost 20.
Okay. And the reason I asked that question is because I think that is like, that issue right now is probably the most timely issue, right? I mean, everyone's having trouble with staffing, getting back to work post-COVID, how the workplace has changed. I mean, everybody is asking that question, and that's not a new issue, right? That's an issue that's been around forever. And it's, it's just highlighted right now because of, it's really, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's always been around. It's never been, you can never ignore your staff, but there's never been a time.
Well, and I'll tell you something else we did. We did what was called NETMA, NETMA. Nobody ever tells me anything. And we did it once a month. We did it primarily for the people that were, because half my staff was in the field, half was in the office. So we did it for the people that were in the office. It was a brown bag lunch. It was not mandatory. If you wanted to attend, fine. If you didn't want to attend, fine. We didn't care. It was all about, there were no questions off the table. If it was something we couldn't discuss, we would tell them. They asked some really pointed questions, and there were times that we had to give pointed answers, but they appreciated it. One of my staff members that ran the administrative side, he would bring a fire hat in every month and give the fire hat to whoever put out the biggest fire. We brought a lady in to show you how to exercise at your desk. We was trying to think of some of the other things, but I mean, it was called NETMA. Nobody ever tells me anything. So we wanted them to feel very free to ask any questions. And I told them one time, I said, I'd rather you make 20 decisions and screw up on 3 of them. We'll fix it.
Right.
But don't not make decisions. And as long as you're legal, ethical, and moral, we'll fix them. I've screwed up more than you'll ever screw up. So make decisions. We empower you to do that. Move the business, and don't be afraid to come in the office and say, man, I screwed up big time. Just come in and tell us. We'll fix it. If you hide it, that's a problem. But, we'll fix it. So I feel like that, and everybody showed up. I don't think we never not had everybody there, because it was just, once they kind of understood what it was, they were so pleased that they were included, because they told me one time, they said, nobody ever included us before. And I said, well, we are now.
No, that's great. And it's so great to make people feel like they're part of, maybe they're not part of the decision making, but at least they're part of, understanding why decisions are made. You're probably got a lot of feedback in those meetings, whether you wanted it or not, right? So you can, and maybe that feedback really moved the needle in certain areas. But at a minimum, it just made people feel like part of the team, right? Because they're getting information, they're able to ask questions. And as you said, it empowers them to really do their jobs and make decisions and know that you've got their back, right? Which is super important. And
it all boils down to treat people the way you'd want to be treated. And if you just sort of keep that theory in mind, then the rest of it takes care of itself. Because, I had worked at different places over time that, everybody does this as well. Gee, I wish they did X, or they should be doing it this way. And I had the opportunity to do it the way I thought it should be done. And that was to make sure everybody was included and felt comfortable. And I just want them to wake up every day and want to come to work, because if they didn't, then I had a real problem.
Yeah, because then you have employees that don't want to come to work, and I don't know whether you've heard about this term quiet quitting, right? Where they're just kind of like doing the minimum so they can stay there. Or you lose important team members, right? Like people that are doing a really good job, if they don't like, they don't like it there anymore, they're going to start looking, and then someone else is going to get all that talent that you've cultivated over that time. So
exactly. So that was definitely, I enjoyed being there, and I miss that to a certain degree, all the camaraderie and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But when I can sit here in my t-shirt and blue jeans on certain days, I don't miss that either.
I get it. No, I think it's a perfect fit for you. I mean, you've had the best of, all worlds, it sounds like. And I'm super inspired by our conversation, and I was inspired by the first one. Love meeting people that have, really stuck it out in the industry for as long as you have and been successful and still love it after all, all the time that you've been doing it. So, it's really, I'm really, really blessed to have been able to interview you for the podcast, and I won't take up any more of your time today, but on behalf of the committee, we thank you so much for being part of the committee. I know you're on an IFA committee now, even still, for all of the service that you've done with IFA, and then, just for being so great and such a great kind of bright light in our business. So thank you so much for that.
I appreciate it. And, if anybody has any questions about how I did something back in the day, I'll be glad to share anything I've got. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll link all your information so that people can get in touch with you.
Okay.
Again, this is the Women's Franchise Committee podcast, Her Success. If you're not involved with the committee and you'd like to get involved, please visit our page on the IFA website. And we also have local chapters of the women's called the Women's Franchise Network in most major cities. So there's links to that information as well. So yeah, get in touch with me, Lynette, get in touch with our chair with the IFA. And we'd love to kind of get you involved if you're listening and are not yet involved. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Lynette.
Thanks.
I want to get on that email list. So tell your husband to put my email on it.
That sounds good.
All right. And we'll talk soon, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.